Welcome to Fostering Bridges, a podcast dedicated to uplifting, supporting, and empowering foster, adoptive, and kinship parents.
Well, today I have the honor of visiting with a longtime friend of mine, Senator Gelser Blouin out of Oregon. And hey, Sarah, how you doing this morning?
I am good, but we sure do miss you here.
You know, I miss the people. I don't miss the job. So, but before we get going, I want to make sure our listeners know, Senator Gelser, the reason I wanted you on, and I'm still used to calling you Senator Gelser, is Senator Gelser is my wayward sister from another mother. I say wayward because she's a Oregon Beaver. I'm an Oregon Duck, so we're rivals in that.
Yep.
I was a Republican when I was in office. She was a senator, or not senator, a Democrat when I was in office. I was in the House. She was in the Senate. So it seemed like, on paper, we were on the opposite sides of so many things, but yet I loved our time working together on such important topics, a lot of topics, but especially child welfare. And, something that I think all parties and all schools and all chambers should agree on. So I wanted to have you on today. Thank you for joining us. Now, you've been in office for 20 years now, right?
Almost, it'll be 20 in December. Yeah.
Wow.
It's
So
went like that. It's like your kids growing up. It's fast.
and you spent how long in the House? I know you're in the Senate now, but how long in each chamber?
About 10 and 10 now. So 10 years in the House, and I'm coming up on my 10th year in the Senate.
All right.
Or finishing my 10th year in the Senate.
Congratulations. That's a long time. And in the, Democrats in Oregon are in the majority. So Democrats have all the gavels, and you are the
It was
chair.
not that way when I started. I started in the minority.
Excellent. So
Briefly.
you know what it feels like.
I do. I do.
I only know what it feels like to be in the minority or the super minority, both of those. But so you chair a committee, a very important committee, which is Human Services, right?
Yes.
And what other committees do you sit on?
This session, I also sit on the Budget Committee for Human Services, and then I sit on the Education Committee and the Judiciary Committee.
And just if anything's changed, let me know. But just for clarification, so chairing the Senate Committee on Human Services, that's all about all policies go through there, but they don't make the financial decisions. They may want to do something that has a financial impact, but they don't actually make that final say. Whereas the Budget Committee, Subcommittee on Human Services makes the final decision. Oh, they refer it to Ways and Means to make the final decision on the money portion, right?
Exactly. I think the only tool that the Policy Committee has is it's a little bit of the gatekeeper of what gets down to the Ways and Means Committee. And I've been around a while, so this is the week when we have to start making the decisions about what's moving forward. And it's the first time I've started winnowing by measuring the costs so that some of the policy prioritization can make it down to the Budget Committee.
Right, because there's a lot of good ideas that don't cost money, a lot of good ideas that do cost money,
Yes.
and not every good idea that costs money do we get to do.
Exactly.
Or do you get to do? I'm not part of it anymore. So, been out. So before we get into it, because I want to ask you about, affecting change through legislation. But before we get to that, a couple of years ago, you had a national award, the Carl Levin Award. Tell me about it. What is it? I've read about it, but I want to hear from you.
Sure. So the Carl Levin Award is given through the Levin School of Law out of Wayne State University in Michigan. And it is focused on the role of legislatures and Congress in exercising oversight. And the idea is we have these three branches of government, and the legislature has the role of making sure that the government is delivering for the people that it serves. And so in 2019, I did a lot of work around, well, really starting in 2014, kids in care, particularly kids that were in congregate care. And this had to do with the quality of services that they were getting, how places were licensed. And then we started sending kids away to out-of-state placements. And it turned out that we were feeding our kids unknowingly into this giant industry that really preys on desperate families and desperate child welfare systems that feel that they don't have enough places for people. And our kids were really hurt, not just a couple of them, but but a lot of them. And so we held a series of hearings really almost for a whole year over the course of an interim. I requisitioned thousands and thousands of pages of public records. I traveled around the country and met with the kids in the facilities and just fought as hard as I possibly could to get them home. And we did eventually, after many of them were hurt, got them all home. And I'm proud of that.
And I am proud of you for that. I remember many conversations throughout that season. One of the things that I'm going to highlight that you didn't mention, that the award, when you read about it, it talks about is to promote bipartisan, fact-based oversight and to recognize legislators who conduct it. And that's the oversight, which you just talked about, but also the bipartisan portion. I loved the ability that you've had throughout the years on these topics. And I know that there's topics that hit the media that R's and D's don't agree on, that's fine. But when it comes to children, the ability to work across the aisle and just make an impact and work hand in hand with the folks that don't see eye to eye on so many other things. So I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you for that. That was a pretty cool. They flew you out to give you the award, right?
No, it was COVID. Yeah, it was
Oh.
COVID times. So I was on the Zoom. But I did want to go back to that, to the bipartisan piece, because I think that was a really important piece of it. In politics, it's really easy to do the gotcha. And it's hard for executive branches to take criticism. It's really hard. And I think it's especially hard when it's coming from someone in your own party. So that has been a little turbulent, but I think it was an example of when we take the time to work together, we can get things done. So this was a very, very explosive issue. And there was a media person in the Senate Republicans that was very adept at getting attention for things. And they were also concerned about this issue. And I went and talked with him and his member about, do we want to talk about it or do we want to get something done? And they agreed they wanted to get something done. And so we prepared for those hearings ahead of time by having some private meetings with the agency, with whistleblowers, and with a couple of Republican members, a trusted member of the media, just really getting everybody steeped in the facts and the background and preparing the agency to know what it was that we were trying to do, with the hope that we could kind of walk through this together and recognize we all want what's right for the kids. And if we get caught up in what's your idea or what's my idea or who's going to win the day, we're never going to get there for the kids. And that's really hard because the news likes to write about kids. And I think when there's publicity, that kind of increases the conflict a little bit.
Right. I agree. Couldn't agree more. So thank you so much again for setting that model on so many topics. So throughout the years, tell me, what are some of your favorite pieces of child welfare related legislation that you've managed to work on? Because I imagine there's probably not a single piece of child welfare legislation that's gone through Oregon in the last decade that doesn't have your fingerprints on it. So which ones are you the most excited about?
Oh gosh. I think the work that it was really your work that we did together on current caretaker, really trying to center children and their attachment and trying to find a balance with that over the years. So, you and I worked together. There were families that had had children for a very long time. And all of a sudden, they were going to be sent away to people that they didn't know. They weren't bad people. They were great folks, but they came into, and the department invited them into their lives too late, after attachments and bonds and lives had been formed. So I'm very proud that we righted that a little bit. I remember going to an adoption celebrations with you, and that felt really great. We followed up this last year with some legislation. I had gotten involved with a family that went through a really difficult situation where the child was moved after age 3 across the country. I also got to know the family that the child was moved to. These were all really wonderful people. And the problem was there wasn't enough work on the front end to connect with this biological family who from day one wanted to be adoptive placements. So we worked on legislation last session that requires the department to immediately start contacting all of these relatives, and in that to provide this notice to them about what our current caretaker law is and the importance of moving quickly, and to share that with the biological mom and dad, because sometimes they're afraid to share information. And one of the things I'm worried about is that sometimes these parents have come from really challenging circumstances, and they've actually worked very hard to protect their kids from some people in their lives. And I want to find a mechanism for us to listen to that so that they can feel like they can collaborate and cooperate, because they'll feel like they have a voice and can say, hey, this relative, yes, but this relative, please no, because, I was in their house and I know what that was like. And in fact, they don't even know where I am right now. Please don't call them. So that's still work ongoing, but that was the first step in really trying to find that
Right.
balance. Families are hard.
Oh, and child welfare is messy.
Yes.
One of my favorite things about working legislation with child welfare was seeing the the effect on individual families. Now, I always reminded people that we don't change policy for an individual family. But when
Right.
we see a policy that's bad through one specific example, then we try to change it across the board for everyone. But nonetheless, you still get to see it play out when you're done, and to be able to, like you mentioned, go to some of these adoption ceremonies and to know specific stories of what the work we did made a difference in that child's life, that family's life forever. And it's different than a lot of other legislation where it's like, you know, can you lane split or not with a motorcycle? Doesn't affect me much. I don't ride a motorcycle. It's just so personal, and you get to be part of that and see the fruit of what you're doing, and sometimes the mistakes of what you're doing. Um,
Yeah.
and so I do miss that portion of it. So what would you contribute your success to? I have a couple theories as I've watched you over the years, and I'll comment on that. But your success in passing and really attempting to reform an entire state's legislation around child welfare policy. What's it taken, and how have you been able to be successful? And I know there's been a lot of bumps along the ways. I'm not saying it's smooth, but
Right.
what do you
Right.
think?
Yeah, we're in a pretty bumpy week right now. Um, I think what has helped me, because it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot to hold the stories. And I think that's also what's helped me is I try to remain focused on the people and recognize that the changes that we're making really affect people, and that we have to keep the people at the center of what we're doing rather than the systems. And that's hard because we generally see the systems. I think we can't make policy without really digging in and hearing from the people that the policies impact. In child welfare, that means the parents that are struggling, who have, come into the system because they are at a time in their life they can't safely care for their children. And sometimes they can with the right supports. And it's my belief we have to do everything we possibly can to make that happen and make that successful. It also means listening to the kids. And I think that is the thing that I have really focused on, is what are they saying? Because whether they're 4 or they're 17, this is their life. It's not a bill, it's not a policy, it's not a pilot program. It's their year of being 7 years old, or
Right.
it's their year of entering high school. And so often we talk over them. And I have really tried to keep bringing them back. That's why I wanted to travel. I wanted to see the places that they were in, but I
Mhm.
also wanted to hear what they were saying. And the thing that struck me, in multiple states, these kids said in almost exactly the same words, I'm here because I'm so bad that nobody in Oregon wants me.
Oh,
And what we lose is that people are watching our hearings, they're listening to our words, and kids are learning about themselves. When we talk about a foster care shortage or how hard the kids are these days, these kids hear that and they take that in about themselves, and they start to take ownership of the challenges in their lives. And we forget they're children. I would say it's not a policy, but it was a moment uh, in my office. It was actually earlier this year. A young person walked into my office. They were now with a state agency, and they asked, "Can I give you a hug?" I thought that was odd. I had never met them before. I said, sure. And so we hugged, and they said, I was in congregate care when you passed legislation around restraint and seclusion.
Hmm.
And I was frequently restrained, and I watched other people do it. And I think that saved my life. And that felt good and hard because of what they'd been through. And also surprising that they knew, because a lot of times I think we think of kids locked away not knowing what's happening out there, but that there was a kid that knew a bill number and could see that policy change in their daily life and the facility that they were in really, really struck me. And I just think it's so important to listen to them. It's also the weakness, because I get very passionate and
Right.
I'm a mom and I fight really hard for my kids. And when I'm fighting for these kids, I fight for them just as hard as I would for my own.
Yeah, I love that. Remembering that that when it comes to child welfare, it's not a report, it's not a statistic. Those are helpful, but these are individual lives that are living it every single day.
Yes.
So when you talk a scenario, it's not a fictional thing. It's someone went through that, and that's why we have that story. So I appreciate that. I'm going to add for you the things I've seen you do. We've already talked about the bipartisanship, but Senator Gelser, you are one of the senators and representatives across the board, the elected officials that seem to know their stuff. Like you, I've watched you study page after page after page of legislation, where sometimes it's easy for folks to get the final draft and breathe through. I've been able to ask you something on a 100-page document. I think it was 144 page. And you're like, I'm pretty sure that's in section 16, somewhere around page 72. You put in the work. You put in the work to know the legislation and to know the scenario. And I appreciate that. And it shows. So keep doing that. I really appreciate it. So what are, I know you just said it's a turbulent week, so I'm not trying to get you to divulge any of the current scenarios, but in general, when somebody has a grand idea and they want to see this great new policy concept, what are some of the roadblocks and bumps that they have to get through in order to make that happen?
Oh, there's so many. So I think the first is figuring out, is it something that can be changed through policy at all? Or is it something that people need to better understand? And I think that is the other thing that's important, is recognizing that policy laws, they're just words on a page. We could pass policy all day long, and if we don't bring it to life, it doesn't really make a difference. And so I think it's really understanding the systems that implement the laws as well. What are the mechanisms that need to be in place inside so that the policy doesn't get derailed? I think what you talked about, kind of knowing what you're talking about, it is worth taking the time to look at, has anybody done this before? What worked? What didn't? What are the smaller changes that we can make in something to move it forward? And then and this is what's really hard for me. Like you said, I just guzzle up data and I can really overwhelm people. So I think that's the other challenge, is figuring out how to distill to the high points, because in a legislature, we all have the things that we're working really deeply on. And then there's 3,000 other bills, and we have to not be as deep on that and know who we trust on that, which means we also have to know how to communicate. So that, I think, is an important piece. The other part is not seeing opposition as negativity, which doesn't mean that there isn't, anger inside my office, or,
Yeah.
it's a battle, it's a fight, it's hard, there's frustrations, but it's really important to just run at the fire and run at the opposition, because it doesn't do you any good to save it up until the end, because you've not addressed the issues. And generally, we can come up with much better policy if everybody is coming together to do it. I think an example of that, when I was in the House, I closed the Oregon School for the Blind that had been open for over 100 years. That's not something you do and go put on your campaign mailer.
Right.
But there were a lot of problems at the school. The kids were not, the staff, it was not a great situation for them, which is an understatement. And when I did it, I knew that there would be substantial opposition from a lot of people. So I slowed down the process. I went to the legislative administration and asked, how do we get all these amendments and bills printed in Braille? And how do we change our system so that they are in readers, so that we could get them out ahead of time to the people that were going to come and oppose the bill, to make sure that they had the materials. I needed them to see that so they could find the parts that weren't right, because nobody's idea is right all the time. And even ideas that are right today, they're going to need to be changed later. And I think that's the other challenge, is that I think we're not great at nuance in policymaking. And so we kind of have this pendulum that goes these big ways. I like to think
Right.
about it as I used to play a viola, and when you tune the viola, you've got the big pegs at the top, and that's where you make the big changes. And as you play along, you have to keep using your fine tuners, because you just get a little bit off, or you're not quite at the right place. If you go up and you start twisting the big peg again, you're going to start all over and disrupt and have to refinagle all of your other strings as well. And that's what I wish that we could do. And that's a challenge too. I would love it, especially in child welfare. That pendulum is really volatile and really hard on kids and families and workers in the system.
Of course. You mentioned that, is the problem someone's trying to solve, will a policy actually solve it? I would throw out there also that not all changes in policy need legislation. I remember one of our early days, man, it must have been 2015, 2016. The governor at the time had a handful of us over to the governor's house, and we talked about child welfare and just really kind of a brainstorm on what are some issues and challenges. And I remember one of the conversations there being about that the caseworkers were spending so much time doing paperwork, and that's not why they went into social work. They went into social work because they wanted to work with the kids. Right. And so out of that meeting, the department and it wasn't even an official change, they actually just kind of reallocated some of the social service assistants to help with that Right. paperwork. And I don't know that was ever a written policy even, but it started alleviating some of the paperwork and allowing the caseworkers to focus on what they wanted to do more. Yeah. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting an idea where to the right people. And so that's kind of my last question for you, that because I know you have a busy day, lots going on there in Oregon, is if somebody has an idea, and they don't happen to have direct contact with a senator or a governor or something like that, what do they do with it? How can they get that idea aired and vetted?
There's a couple of ways. I think podcasts and social media are a great way to find other people that are thinking about the same thing and to refine the idea a little bit more. But legislators are much more accessible than people think. I mean, we're all just citizens that go to a big building for several months every year and are eager to meet with and hear from people. I think it's important for people to bring those ideas not when the legislature's in session. I think most folks don't realize most of the bills are written before the legislature ever comes together. That's really the time we talk about what's on the paper. But people should make phone calls and talk to the policymakers until they get in. Be polite, but be firm and be persistent. And I think it's helpful to be really clear about two things. This is the problem that I see. This is the solution that I see. And this is what I need from you to help me get there. I think that really helps. What's hard, and I think you know this, and it's in any work, we want to listen and hear about challenges, but we also want to help. So having an action item or a request or a vision for what the solution is helpful. And we need all of them. We need all of those ideas.
And I'd add to it from past experience there, when you put those ideas forward, to really it's not just an idea and a solution, but show you've done some work on it. Who have you talked to? Who else is on board? What organizations have helped with this? And even what are some of the potential oppositions to this? And have you talked to them? Yes. Because there's usually a valid reason for opposition. And so to be able to have sorted those out. And one more tip I will tell people, because I think folks, and you're probably one of the people who read 99% of your emails that come in, but most legislators have their staff it filters their emails. We get so many emails coming in, and so it's just impossible to spend the time eating that. So it gets filtered, and the staff will probably respond. If you really want the rep or the senator to respond, ask some direct questions, that are pretty obvious. You'll probably still get a response from their staff to begin with, but make sure you're asking questions so it's not just a, hey, I gave you this information and then I went on my way. You're looking for a response there. Unfortunately, we just had a technology glitch right up at the end of our scheduled time with Senator Gelser Blouin. So just want to say thank you, Senator Gelser, for coming on. We appreciate the work, appreciate the bipartisanship, and appreciate your love for children. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Fostering Bridges. We hope today's conversation gave you new insights, encouragement, and a reminder that you're not alone on this journey. If you found value in this episode, please share it with someone who might need it. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Remember, building bridges in our families, our communities, and ourselves is a continuous journey. Until next time, take care and keep fostering those bridges.